Okay, in this video, we're going to have a deeper look into what we call planned economies, or sort of your more communist or centrally governed economies. So, first of all, planned economy, just a quick recap: resources are owned by the government and a central authority. So, the government, or sometimes we have planning ministers, decide what to produce, when they're going to produce it, how much they're going to produce, or who gets access to goods and services. So generally, the government will establish production targets and price, and the government will determine price of goods and services and how resources are going to be allocated. So it's the government or some other central authority that makes all these economic decisions. Individuals have little, if any, influence over what is produced. Okay, it's up to the government. There's no competition, so the purpose of business is to provide goods and services, not to make a profit. Factories are designed to meet certain quotas, which are determined by the government. Consumers have few, if any, choices because of the lack of competition, and the government sets the prices of goods and services. So, communism, as we said in the past video, grew from the problems citizens had with the appalling work conditions associated with capitalism and the high levels of inequality. So, in managed or planned economies, the government decides what is produced and how it will be distributed to try and avoid those high levels of wealth inequality and people exploiting others because of the profit motive. So, there's often significantly less individual freedom in terms of what's bought and sold. The government or workers distribute goods and services, ideally equally, to try and eliminate both inequality, but also to ensure that harmful products aren't produced within society. So planned economies are generally not as efficient in the production of goods and services because they lack the profit motive. So businesses don't have that incentive to work hard and try and reduce costs because they don't have that same incentive to maximize their profits. The quantity and variety of goods and services available in these economies is often quite small because it's only the government providing them. So you don't have that variety like you would like your 20 different types of soft drinks or chocolate bars or phones. It's traditionally seen as a disadvantage of planned economies, but some people argue that it's a good way to preserve resources moving forward as well. So I just want to talk a little bit about Karl Marx, who was the founder of communism, and he was around in the 19th century, or from 1818 to 1883. So Karl Marx believed that capitalism was unfair and led to the exploitation of the working class by the rich and powerful. So his key phrase was that that communism should be all about from each according to their ability. He used the word his, to each according to his needs. So everyone does the work according to what their skills are, but then we distribute resources according to what people need. So the first part of the principle, from each according to their ability, means that all members of society have the opportunity to develop their talents and skills. So people should go to school, develop their talents in whatever area suits them, and then so everyone will get an education. Everyone will have the ability to reach their potential, and have every opportunity to give back to society. Therefore, theoretically, there'd be no uneducated or poorly educated people. There should be no unemployment, so everyone will have a role in society and will be allocated to a certain job. Um, no one will be forced by economic necessity to work in fields unsuited to their ability. So people will get to choose where they work. So there is a bit of choice in this Marxist communism. The second part of the principle, to each according to their needs, means that what citizens will receive in return for their labour. So every citizen will get access to goods and services that will allow them to satisfy their needs. He believed that not everyone should receive an equal amount, but people should receive according to their individual needs, which we'll talk about a bit more in a second. So Marx did not believe that society could advance directly from capitalism to communism. So he had what we call this two-phase theory, where we went to sort of a lower form of communism to the second phase, which was his communist utopia. So in stage one is got sort of features of both communism and capitalism. So society would work hard to develop the economic, intellectual, and cultural forces to move to the ultimate phase. So in this lower phase, things were classless in the sense that nobody owned private property. There was no class division between capitalists and workers, so no owners of businesses. People couldn't own multinational corporations or anything like that. However, people would still get paid according to work performed. So even though the government or everyone would collectively own resources, people who contributed more to the production process would get paid more. So you can see this so there's no private ownership. So there's no people like Steve Jobs and Trump and Richard Branson owning big businesses. But your people like your neurosurgeons will still receive more income than your lower skilled workers because they're arguably contributing more to the production process. So the difference between capitalism is that there's no private ownership and no profit motive, but people are still getting paid according to their contribution to production. So despite being an improvement on capitalism, compensation according to work rather than need will still lead to divisions within society. So there'll still be people that earn more and the people that earn less, and that's not according to their need yet. This limitation, he believed, could be overcome over time as people change their values and what they valued as important in life. So rather than material needs, being moral and achieving intellectual gains is what he believed was more important. So there will be a working class government in stage one, which constantly try to develop the economy and improve living standards, but they also fight towards moving back to capitalism. The means of production are owned by everyone, so everyone owns goods and services, but people will be paid according to the work they do. Equal pay for equal work, and no capitalist will steal all the profits. Um, any sort of additional money that's made by businesses will then be put into things like healthcare and education. So any additional profits or money that are established will then be put into trying to improve the quality of life. Stage two of communism is that government owns resources, and rather than distributing based on people's contribution to production, distribution would be according to need. So people would be paid based on what they need rather than their contribution to the production process or their skills. So the key phase is from each according to their ability to each according to need. So basically, part of the principle means that all members of society will have the right to develop their skills like they would in stage one. Everyone will get an education. Everyone will be able to work to their potential. So there'll be no uneducated or poorly educated people, no unemployment. No one will be forced to work in areas they don't want to. But the second part, each according to their needs, means that people will get paid based on their individual needs. So, for example, someone who has lots of children will get paid more than someone that doesn't have anyone to support. If you had, say, children with a disability, or you were looking after adults with a disability, an intellectual disability, which meant they couldn't work, you'd receive more money because your needs are higher, whereas someone who was living by themselves wouldn't have the same requirements. So people that had illnesses or disabilities that required more money would get more in the production process, but it didn't have anything to do with what you did. So a truck driver could get paid more than a neurosurgeon if the truck driver had more needs than the neurosurgeon. So that's basically the two phases of Marx capitalist society. Stage one, from each according to ability to each according to work performed, but still government ownership or collective ownership of resources. And stage two, from each according to ability to each according to need. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is sort of this idea between the similarities between communism and socialism. So sometimes people use these two words interchangeably, but they are different. We have quite a few economies around the world that would argue that they're socialist in principle, but very few communist societies. So they both adhere to the principle that the majority of resources should be owned collectively by the public rather than individual ownership of resources. And they both desire to eliminate worker exploitation and try and eliminate this class system. But the difference is that socialism is a less radical form than communism. So workers contribute to the common good, but the government's sort of in charge of providing things like healthcare and schooling and fire services. So the government will provide a lot of essential services and own a lot of the key businesses, but socialists can still own personal property. So individuals can still own, say, digital cameras, still own products, couches, houses, etc., etc. So they're not against purely private ownership. So the main difference is socialists, most things are owned by the government because they believe that's the best way to ensure fairness, but people can still own private property. It's not completely according to need, but most things are owned by the government. In communist society, citizens cannot own private properties. Okay, there's collective ownership of everything. You can't own private properties. It's a totally classless, moneyless, and stateless economy. So it's a more extreme form of socialism. In socialist economies, most businesses are government owned, whereas communist, basically everything is government or collectively owned. So no individual ownership of assets, houses, etc. Socialism, personal properties can be kept. However, private property can't be used for exploitation or oppression, but you can have private property. Um, they believe that capitalism is a threat to equality and public interest. However, they don't believe that all capitalists should be completely eliminated. So they're not completely against capitalism because it can be sort of cast certain advantages of capitalism. They can exist in a socialist state, so you can have some private ownership of businesses, for example, but it's mainly government owned. Communist, again, completely against capitalism. So wealth should be shared by the masses. All goods and services are public property. Capitalism should be destroyed in order to give way to a classless society. So communism is more extreme than socialism. Socialism advocates for government ownership of businesses and for equality and for looking after people's rights and for high taxes on the rich, whereas communism believes in complete collective ownership. Nobody can own their own assets. Everything is owned by everybody. Problems with planned economies, as we mentioned, they're not responsible to market signals. We talked about this in the last video. They often don't mean customer satisfaction. There's often long wait times because things aren't produced in correct quantities. Um, and generally, as I mentioned in class, they often leads to sort of weird production where people will be paid based on quotas. So they might make, excessive amounts of baby shoes, for example, because they're getting paid based on overall output based on profit. So it can lead to some weird decision making as well. Um, so communism ultimately doesn't work because people are self-interested and respond to incentives. They work harder if there's a reward attached to what they do. They need the incentive to work hard if you're running a business. Consumers want the best quality products at the lowest price. They want variety. They want choice. Equality does not promote effort, innovation, or productivity. So to summarize, it doesn't value creativity. It forces collectivization, which means people can't own assets, which means there's less incentive to work, less rights, less incentive to work hard. It's also led to mass murders in the past because people have been forced to give up their property. Particularly in the Soviet Union, people weren't a fan of giving up their property, so they rebelled, and that often led to people being forced into into camps and often killed because they went against what the government dictated. So Stalin was responsible for a lot of murders because people weren't willing to um, sort of basically go along with collective ownership. Thanks.